Welcome to the Sky Commander Flight Brief. It's your mission-ready podcast for drone pilot training and aerial insights across Canada.
From Transport Canada rules to real-world drone ops, we break it down, take you higher, and help you earn your wings. Because here at skycommander.ca, we don't just fly.
It hints there's more to it. It's a masterclass, a deeper level, maybe a philosophy or a community focus, perhaps.
It's definitely intriguing, sets them apart from just, a basic tips show. Skycommander.ca is the obvious next step. Precisely. If you're thinking about flying a drone in Canada, boom, this content is aimed right at you.
Powered by skycommander.ca.
The elite podcast for Canada's drone pilot. Okay, let's get started.
We all, try hard to be well-informed, right? Especially when safety's on the line. We check the weather meticulously, scrutinize our gear, drill emergencies. But there's this one area, personal fitness for flight, where maybe even pros sometimes rely more on vague feelings and hard data. What happens when, say, a simple pill you bought over the counter or just feeling a bit tired actually grounds you silently before you even pick up the controls?
That is really the core question, isn't it, in any kind of operational aviation? And the answer, well, it's rooted in a fundamental legal duty. For pilots under Part 107 here in the U.S., it's Section 5.17. That's the anchor. It's this non-negotiable self-grounding duty. It's not just advice, it's absolute. It basically says you must avoid flying if or even if you just have a reason to suspect you've got any condition, physical or mental, that could interfere with safe operation. It means, you've got to be the toughest safety officer on yourself.
Right. You're your own toughest critic. And to make that self-check manageable, quantifiable even, the whole industry leans on the IMSAFE checklist. Illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, emotion. It's that gold standard mnemonic, really. It gives you a structured way to, pre-flight the most vital bit of kit, your own brain.
Exactly. And our goal today, our mission, is to go way beyond just knowing what IMSAFE stands for. This deep dive, it's about digging out those hard, non-negotiable, no-go lines that professional crews live by. We're focusing on the surprising specifics, the numbers, the actual half-lives of drugs, the way regulations are interpreted, like that 60-hour rule for a common cold medicine, which catches so many people out, or why 8 hours after a drink often just isn't enough. We want to give you the definitive professional guide to fitness pulled straight from FAA guidance and, international standards too. Let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Okay, let's kick this off with maybe the topic most prone to wishful thinking.
Alcohol. Everyone gets, you can't fly drunk, obviously. But the specific regulatory definition of fit to fly, well, that's much stricter and honestly way more complex than just passing a breathalyzer.
That complexity, that's precisely why professionals need the details hammered down. For U.S. operations, the starting point for Part 107 pilots comes via HAL 107.27, which points back to the General Aviation Rule, Section 91.5 and 6. We use a little memory aid for this. The 80.0400 standard, it sort of sums up the three hurdles you absolutely have to clear.
Okay, walk us through those three hurdles. What's the 80.0400 mean in practice?
Right, so first, the 8 phys, that's your minimum time, 8 hours bottle to throttle. 8 full hours have to pass between your last drink and when you intend to operate the aircraft.
8 hours minimum. Got it.
Then the 0.04, that's your blood alcohol content, or BAC. If you were tested, it has to be less than 0.04%. Now, most drone pilots aren't getting BAC tests routinely, but that number sets a very clear physiological limit. It's half the driving limit in many places. Okay, so 8 hours under 0.04 BAC. And the final 0, you said this one's maybe the most important.
It really is. It's the legal safety net, the absolute backstop, zero impairment. The regulation demands absolutely no impairment from alcohol. You could technically pass the 8-hour clock, you could be under 0.04 BAC, but if you still feel any effects, maybe your foggy reaction time feels slow, you're just generally fatigued from it, then you are legally grounded by Section 107.17. You fail the zero impairment test. Full stop.
Now, you touched on international standards. This is where things get interesting for professional crews, right? They often adopt a sort of highest common denominator approach.
Exactly right. Especially if you're operating near borders or maybe working with international clients, you need consistency. Look at Canada, for instance. Their standard CAR 602.03 bumps the minimum wait time up to 12 hours bottle to throttle.
12 hours. Okay, so 4 hours longer than the U.S. minimum?
Yes. And while Canada doesn't have that specific 0.04 BAC number in their rule, they are just as strict, maybe even stricter interpretation-wise, on the no impairment part. So what do professional outfits do? the ones operating cross-border or those just wanting the absolute highest safety margin, they often adopt the strictest elements of both. So that means a 12-hour minimum wait, plus ensuring zero observable impairment, and basically assuming you'd also meet the US 0.04 limit. It's about building in buffer.
That really highlights the difference between just being legal and actually being safe, doesn't it? Like if I wake up, say, 9 hours after my last drink, technically in the US, I'm past the 8-hour mark. But if I feel off, slow, I still need to stand down.
You absolutely should feel obligated, because that feeling off is the impairment section 107.17 talks about. That's the core idea. And this is where we need to bust those hangover myths. You know, people think coffee, a cold shower, maybe even oxygen will sober them up faster. The FAA is crystal clear on this. Nope. None of that speeds up how fast your liver metabolizes alcohol. Your body eliminates it at a pretty fixed rate. Plus, the cognitive effects. They hang around much longer than the alcohol concentration itself. And if you drank enough to get intoxicated, chances are your sleep quality was garbage, which just piles fatigue on top.
So the FAA actually suggests an even stricter kind of operational benchmark beyond the bare minimum legal rule.
It does, yeah. In advisory materials, they suggest thinking about a conservative 24-hour buffer, especially after any significant drinking, like intoxication, occurred. This isn't just about BAC anymore. It's recognizing that the hangover, the residual fatigue, the slower thinking, the reduced reaction time, all of that counts as impairment. It violates that no-influence standard, regardless of the 8-hour legal clock. Good professional judgment always defaults to the longer, safer margin.
Okay, let's pivot from the bar to the medicine cabinet. This feels like a really common trap, maybe even more dangerous because it seems so innocent. Over-the-counter sleep aids, cold meds.
Oh, it's a massive blind spot. Huge. Because that phrase over-the-counter creates this false sense of safety. Pilots think, hey, I bought it at the pharmacy, no prescription needed, must be fine for flying. But that's just not true. If a medication has PM in the name, like Tylenol PM, Advil PM, it almost certainly contains a sedating antihistamine. Usually diphenhydramine, that's the active ingredient in Benadryl, or maybe doxylamine, which is in some Unisum products.
And you mentioned before we started recording, the actual data on this is, well, it's chilling. Diphenhydramine isn't just risky, it's statistically linked to fatal accidents.
It's a statistic that really should make everyone stop and think. The FAA's own lab, the Civil Aerospace Medical Institute, YAMMI, where they do the forensic toxicology for accidents, they consistently find that diphenhydramine, DPH, is the single most common non-alcohol drug found in fatally injured pilots. We're not talking about illegal drug use here. We're talking about everyday people taking an OTC medication and unknowingly degrading their ability to fly safely.
So why is it so bad? It's not just about feeling drowsy right after you take it, is it? The impairment lasts longer.
Precisely. It's not just simple drowsiness. Diphenhydramine works by blocking histamine receptors, yes, that causes sleepiness, but it also has significant anticholinergic effects. It messes with acetylcholine, which is a key neurotransmitter for things like memory, learning, reaction time. That interference causes a lasting cognitive impairment, fuzziness, poor recall, difficulty focusing, getting fixated on one thing, and crucially, DPH has a long pharmacological half-life. It sticks around in your system.
And that half-life, that's the scientific basis for the hard stand-down time the rule professionals have to follow.
Absolutely. This is where we get the 60-hour rule. This isn't advice. It's a non-negotiable operational standard derived from FAA guidance for safety-sensitive personnel. If you take a medication containing one of these sedating antihistamines, specifically diphenhydramine or doxylamine, you must not fly, must not exercise your certificate privileges for a minimum of 60 hours after your last dose.
60 hours. That's 2.5 days.
2.5 days. That 60 hours represents roughly 5 half-lives of the drug. That's the time it generally takes for about 97% of the drug to clear your system, minimizing those residual cognitive effects.
Wow. That 60-hour window completely changes how you plan things. If a pilot takes, say, Benadryl on a Friday night, hoping to catch up on sleep, they've just grounded themselves for the entire weekend operation.
They absolutely have. And that's the reality check professionals have to build into their planning. It forces you to think ahead. Maybe you manage your sleep better proactively rather than reaching for a pill that has such a long operational consequence.
You also mentioned a non-drowsy trap and a kind of rule of thumb for other meds that might be sedating but aren't DPH or doxylamine.
Yes, because non-drowsy on the label can be misleading, especially with older allergy meds. Some first-generation antihistamines, like chlorpheniramine or clemastine, they can still cause significant sedation and require multi-day waiting periods, too. Since there are thousands of drugs out there, the FAA guidance gives us a universal backup, the 5x rule of thumb, or sometimes called the 5 times the dosing interval rule.
Okay, how does a pilot actually use that 5x rule? Say they're looking at a medication label.
Right. First, you always check the official FAA list of allowed-disallowed medications and their specific wait times. That's step 1. But if your drug isn't listed or you need a general principle, you look at the manufacturer's label for the maximum dosing interval. How often can you take it? If the label says take 1 tablet every 12 hours, your maximum interval is 12 hours. You multiply that by 5. So 12 times 5 equals 60 hours. That's your minimum wait time after the last dose. If it says take 1 every 8 hours, then it's 8 times 5, which is 40 hours. This rule ensures you're waiting long enough for the drug's effects to diminish based on how long it's designed to act in your system.
Okay, that's a really practical tool. Let's shift gears now to controlled substances. Cannabis is obviously a huge topic, with state laws changing so fast.
But for aviation?
For aviation, it's actually very simple, very strict. Federal law is the only thing that matters. Cannabis is still a Schedule I controlled substance federally. The FAA enforces a strict no impairment standard, and since it's federally illegal, any use is basically disqualifying from a regulatory standpoint. Doesn't matter what your state law says, your pilot certificate is a federal privilege.
And unlike alcohol, which your body clears relatively quickly, THC hangs around for a lot longer.
Right.
Because it's fat soluble. Exactly. THC metabolites get stored in body fat and can be detected for weeks, sometimes even longer, after use. This long detection window and the difficulty in correlating detection levels with actual impairment is why you see very conservative policies in professional aviation. For example, Transport Canada explicitly requires a 28-day abstinence period for traditional flight crews before duty. Many serious RPAS operations adopt that same 28-day company policy. It provides absolute clarity and makes the no impairment standard much easier to defend.
28 days.
Yeah.
That's a significant commitment. And what about CBD? That seems like a gray area people get caught in.
It's not gray. It's a trap, a huge one, especially if you're in any safety-sensitive role subject to DOT drug testing, or even if you just want zero risk to your record. Here's the bottom line. CBD use is not considered a legitimate medical explanation if you test positive for THC under DOT or FAA rules. The CBD market isn't well regulated federally. Products labeled THC-free can still contain enough THC due to contamination or poor manufacturing to cause a positive test. So a CBD oops, even if you thought you were doing everything right, can lead to a failed drug test. That could mean immediate disqualification or, at the very least, a massive headache and potential career impact. The risk, frankly, just isn't worth it for pilots.
Okay, so we've covered alcohol, medication, cannabis things with pretty clear, often quantifiable rules. But now let's tackle fatigue. It feels more insidious. It affects everyone everywhere. Why is being just a little tired actually so dangerous when you're flying?
It's incredibly dangerous because fatigue is physiological. It's not just feeling sleepy. It actively degrades the core functions you rely on for safety. Think about vigilance, just being able to pay attention over time. Working memory, holding information in your head while you do something else. Attention to detail, catching small anomalies. And probably most importantly, judgment, making good decisions under pressure. Fatigue undermines all of those. I like the analogy of invisible weather. You know, the sky looks clear, everything seems fine, but cognitively, you're already flying in the soup. Your functions are obscured, degraded. This can lead to things like tunnel vision, where you get hyper-focused on one thing and miss something critical off to the side. Or task fixation, where you keep doing something wrong without realizing it.
And the real kicker with fatigue, this thing that makes it so tricky, is that our own built-in tiredness detector breaks down when we're actually tired, right? We convince ourselves we're fine.
Yeah, the research on this is really solid. It's called poor metacognition. When you're fatigued, you are demonstrably bad at judging how fatigued you are. You consistently underestimate your level of impairment. You think willpower or another cup of coffee can push you through. But the reality is, fatigue is a physiological debt. You can't just will it away. Sleep is the only thing that actually repays that debt. And the scary part is, as that sleep debt accumulates, night after night, the risk of making a really bad call, rushing a pre-flight, misinterpreting a warning, skipping a checklist item, it just goes up exponentially.
So if we can't trust ourselves to feel how tired we are, we need external systems, structure. And that starts with understanding our own body clocks, the circadian rhythms.
Absolutely. You have to design your operations with human physiology in mind, not against it. Our bodies have these natural low points in alertness throughout the 24-hour cycle. The big one, the primary one, is that deep slump, usually between about 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. local time. That's when your core body temperature is lowest and your physiological readiness is just naturally at its minimum. Flying complex missions, then, is asking for trouble. There's also a secondary dip, a smaller one, that affects daytime ops. It's that early afternoon slump, maybe 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. People often blame it on lunch.
Yeah, the post-lunch dip.
Right, but it's actually a recognized minor circadian trough where alertness naturally wanes a bit. If you schedule your most demanding, highest-risk tasks right in the middle of these low points, you're basically stacking the deck against safety.
Okay, so knowing those lows is step one. How does a team, maybe a small drone crew, put together a practical mini-fatigue risk management system in FRMS? What are the actual controls that work on the ground?
Good question. It doesn't have to be super complicated. First, you set clear, mandatory sleep targets. For adults, the science points to needing 7 to 9 hours of good quality sleep in the previous 24 hours to maintain optimal performance. That needs to be the goal, communicated, and planned for.
7 to 9 hours. Okay.
Second, you use specific countermeasures strategically. Power naps can be fantastic for combating that afternoon slump, but they have to be done right. Keep them short, 10 to 20 minutes max. If you nap longer, you risk falling into deeper sleep stages.
And you wake up feeling worse.
Exactly. You wake up with sleep inertia, groggy, disoriented, possibly even more impaired than before the nap for a little while. So short and sharp is key for naps.
What about during long stretches of work? Like a mapping mission that goes for hours. It's easy to just keep pushing.
Yeah, you need built-in breaks. Codify them. Make it a rule. Say, a mandatory 10-minute break for every hour of continuous flight or high-concentration groundwork. And that break doesn't mean catching up on emails on your phone. It means physically stepping away, maybe walking around, looking at something distant, resetting your focus, both visually and mentally. Often the easiest way to manage this is through task rotation. The pilot becomes the observer takes a quick break, the technician steps back for a few minutes. Share the load, force the resets.
Let's talk caffeine. It's pretty much essential for a lot of operations, feels like. But when does it cross the line from being a helpful tool to actually hurting your recovery for the next day?
It's definitely a double-edged sword. Caffeine's a tool. Use it like one precisely. Use it early in the day or early in the mission window to help overcome that morning sleep inertia or fight off the midday slump. That's fine. But you have to be careful about late-day caffeine. Why? Because caffeine has a half-life of around 6 hours for most people. That means if you have your last coffee at, say, 6 p.m., half of that caffeine is still active in your system at midnight. It's literally blocking the brain chemicals that signal sleepiness. So it messes with your ability to fall asleep, and maybe more importantly, it disrupts the quality of sleep you do get, preventing that deep restorative sleep you need for genuine recovery.
Okay, so caffeine timing is crucial. And going back to not trusting ourselves, and since we can't rely on feeling tired, we need some kind of objective signal to stop, right? The abort trigger you mentioned.
Yes, the abort trigger is vital. And it can't be based on subjective feelings. It has to be tied to observable, objective performance decline. You need to define these triggers before the mission starts, when everyone's fresh. What will be the sign that fatigue is compromising safety? Examples could be missing a standard radio call-out, like forgetting to announce battery levels. Or maybe someone's checklist discipline suddenly gets sloppy or slow. Or you notice a crew member has developed a slight hand tremor. Or their visual scanning becomes erratic or fixated. If one of those pre-agreed triggers happens, that's it. Mission pauses. Or maybe it's handed over to a backup crew member. You act immediately. You don't sit there and debate, oh, are you sure you're tired? You just follow the procedure.
Makes sense. And fatigue rarely travels alone, does it? It often goes hand in hand with stress and emotion, the S&E and IMSAFE. How does acute stress mess with our flying ability?
Oh, stress is an immediate performance degrader. When you get acutely stressed, like a sudden emergency or intense pressure, your body goes into fight or flight. It floods your system with cortisol, adrenaline. Physiologically, what does that do? Well, it can cause tunnel vision, literally narrowing your field of view. Your heart rate spikes. And very relevant for drone ops, you often get fine motor tremors, shaky hands. Those shaky hands directly impact your ability to make smooth, precise inputs on the controls. Suddenly, delicate maneuvers become jerky and unsafe.
And often that stress comes from outside, right? External pressure. The client breathing down your neck, a storm moving in, that hurry-up factor seems lethal.
It really is. It's the classic get-there-itis trap applied to drones. The client needs the data before sunset, or the weather window is closing fast, or you're just running behind schedule. What happens? People rush, they skip checklist items, they take shortcuts on safety procedures. Their judgment gets clouded by the pressure. To fight this, professional crews need a clearly defined VIVO protocol, sometimes called a safety stop authority. Anyone on the crew, doesn't matter their role or rank, must have the power to call a halt to operations immediately if they feel safety is compromised. And crucially, they need to be able to do that without having to justify it to the client or even their boss right there in the heat of the moment. Safety call stands. Debrief later.
Okay, so you see a crewmate getting visibly stressed or anxious. What can you do right then and there to help mitigate it?
Good question. Immediate actions are key. First, try role swapping. If the person controlling the drone, the RPIC, is stressed, swap them with the visual observer, VO. Just removing them from the direct control task can give them breathing room to reset. Second, increase buffers. Slow down the operation. Fly higher, fly slower, widen the safety margins around obstacles or people, create more time and space. And finally, use physiological techniques. Simple breathing exercises work wonders. Box breathing is a classic. Inhale slowly for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale slowly for 4, hold for 4, repeat. Doing that for just a minute or two can actually activate the body's calming response, the parasympathetic nervous system, helping to manage that acute anxiety and regain focus.
Okay, so our fitness isn't just about sleep and substances. It's also about how the environment changes us, changes our senses. Night operations are a big one here, right? Vision changes drastically.
It really does, and it's something pilots, especially new ones, might not fully appreciate until they experience it. It all starts with understanding how your eyes work differently in the dark. You've basically got 2 types of light-detecting cells in your retina, cones and rods. Cones are packed in the center. They see color, fine detail, and work best in daylight. Rods are more numerous, mostly found in a ring around the center, and they're your low-light specialists. They don't see color well, but they're incredibly sensitive to faint light and movement in your periphery.
Ah, so that ring of rods explains why you shouldn't stare directly at something dim at night.
Exactly, because the center of your retina, where the cones are, becomes a bit of a blind spot in very low light. The rods surrounding that area are doing the heavy lifting. So to actually see a faint object at night, another aircraft, a person on the ground, you have to use what we call off-center or averted vision. You look slightly above, below, or to the side of the target. That way, the image falls onto that sensitive ring of rods, not into the central blind spot. It's a core technique for effective night scanning.
And then there's dark adaptation, the famous dark 30. Why does it take about 30 minutes? What's happening in the eye?
Yeah, dark 30 is the rule of thumb. Dark adaptation is the chemical process where your rods build up a light-sensitive pigment called rhodopsin. In bright light, this pigment gets bleached out, making the rods less sensitive. When you go into darkness, the rhodopsin slowly regenerates. It takes about 30 minutes, give or take, for your rods to reach their peak sensitivity, which can be, get this, up to 100,000 times more sensitive than they were in the light. That 30-minute biological clock is why planning matters. You can't just walk outside and expect perfect night vision instantly. We use that dark 30 idea, maybe even a physical card or checklist item, to remind us to allow that time before relying on our night vision for critical tasks. And the biggest mistake people make is ruining that adaptation with the wrong kind of light.
Oh, absolutely. It's the cardinal sin of night ops, violating light discipline. One quick flash of bright white light checking your phone notifications, using a regular white flashlight, even bright car headlights sweeping past can instantly bleach out that rhodopsin you spent 30 minutes building up. Poof! Reset the clock.
So professional crews are militant about light discipline. Only dim, red light headlamps should be used for tasks inside the operating area because red light doesn't affect rhodopsin nearly as much. All screens, controllers, tablets dimmed way down. And crucially, protecting the pilot's dark adaptation during critical phases like landing or recovery. Maybe the VO handles any bright lights needed well away from the pilot.
And we also have to remember the actual rules about aircraft lighting at night. Yes, the legal requirement. Your drone needs anti-collision lights visible for at least 3 statute miles. That's the baseline under Part 107 night rules. However, the rule does include a safety provision. It allows you to reduce the intensity of those lights if, in your judgment as the pilot, their brightness is causing glare, hurting your night vision, or otherwise interfering with safety. You can't turn them off completely, but you can dim them if needed for safety, provided you document why you did it. Safety justifies the reduction.
Okay, let's switch back to daytime gear for a second. Sunglasses. Seems simple, but I heard you mention polarized ones can be a problem. The FAA actually warns about this.
They do, yeah. It's a surprising gotcha for many pilots, even experienced ones in traditional aviation. Polarized sunglasses are great for cutting glare off water or roads, no doubt, but they work using a special filter, usually oriented vertically. The problem is many digital displays the screen on your drone controller. A GPS unit, tablets, even some anti-glare coatings on windscreens also use polarizing filters. If the filter orientation in your sunglasses happens to be perpendicular to the filter on the screen, zap. Cross-polarization happens. You look at your screen and it can appear completely black, or the colors get weird and distorted. Critical flight info just vanishes depending on the angle you hold your head. So the standard recommendation for flight crews, drone or otherwise, is to stick with good quality, neutral gray or brown lenses that are not polarized.
That's a really good tip. What about interactions between things we take and the environment? Like medications making you more sensitive to the sun?
Yeah, the phototoxic surprise. This is definitely something to be aware of. Certain common medications can make your skin dramatically more sensitive to ultraviolet light. The classic example is the antibiotic doxycycline. It's often prescribed for things like Lyme disease or even traveler's diarrhea, so people might be on it short term. If you're taking a phototoxic drug and operating outside all day, especially over reflective surfaces like pavement or water, your risk of severe sunburn, heat exhaustion, even painful skin reactions goes way up. And that discomfort and illness absolutely impacts your focus and fitness to fly. So operational planning has to account for this. If a crew member must operate while on such a drug, you need controls. Maybe shift the most demanding work to cooler parts of the day, use shade structures like pop-up canopies whenever possible, and insist on full coverage with UPF-rated clothing and wide-brimmed hats.
Good points. Let's wrap this section talking about the environment's direct physiological stress. Heat, cold, altitude. Often ignored until it's too late.
Absolutely. Heat, first off, isn't just uncomfortable, it's a cognitive hazard. Dehydration kicks in way before you actually feel thirsty. As you get dehydrated, your blood volume drops slightly, less oxygen gets to your brain, and you start experiencing headaches, slower thinking, poor decision-making. A professional approach requires a proactive hydration plan. A good rule of thumb is aiming for about 8 ounces, that's 1 standard cup of water every 15 to 20 minutes when doing moderate work out in the heat. And crucially, if you're sweating heavily for hours on end, plain water isn't enough. You're losing salts, electrolytes. You need to replace those too with sports drinks or electrolyte tabs. Otherwise, you risk hyponatremia, essentially diluting your body's sodium by drinking too much plain water. That can cause serious confusion, disorientation, sometimes even seizures. It can look like you're drunk, but don't overdo fluid intake either. Maybe cap it around 6 cups an hour max.
Okay, heat is cognitive. What about cold? Is it mainly about fingers getting numb?
Pretty much. Cold risk primarily centers on the loss of manual dexterity. When your fingers get really cold, they get stiff, clumsy, lose sensitivity. Trying to operate fiddly controller sticks or tiny buttons on a tablet becomes incredibly difficult, if not impossible. This obviously impacts your ability to control the drone precisely. So for cold weather ops, you need mandated warm-up breaks. Maybe every 45 to 60 minutes, crew rotates inside a warm vehicle or building. And before launching in the cold, you absolutely must do a dexterity check. Can you still perform fine motor tasks? A good test is something like, can you easily thread a small zip tie while wearing your gloves? Can you type accurately on the controller? If not, you're not fit to launch until you warm up and pass the check.
Right, makes sense. And finally, altitude. Even if we're just standing on a mountain, not flying high ourselves.
Yes, even ground-based pilots need to consider field elevation. Once you get above about 2,000 meters, or roughly 6,500 feet above sea level, the air is noticeably thinner. Even if you live at sea level and are just visiting, you might start feeling mild hypoxia-like symptoms. Maybe a bit short of breath, slight headache, feeling tired more quickly, maybe even a little confused or slow mentally. It's usually not severe at those altitudes for ground personnel, but it's enough to degrade performance. The keys to mitigating it are hydrate really well, starting before you get to altitude, take it easy, deliberately slow down your work pace, and be extra methodical with checklists.
Okay, we've covered a ton of detail. 60 hours for Benadryl, the 8.040 rule for alcohol, 30 minutes for night vision. Now, how do we pull this all together into a concrete pre-flight decision process? It feels like internalizing these numbers as timers is key.
Internalization is exactly the right word. You need these time frames baked into your thinking. Every pre-flight check, every mission plan should consciously run through what I call the 3 core timers. 1, the alcohol timer. Did I meet the legal minimums? 8 hours US, maybe 12 hours for a higher standard. And crucially, am I at 0 impairment, yes or no? 2, the medication timer. Am I taking anything? If yes, did I check the FAA guidance or apply the 5x dosing interval rule? Have I waited the required time? 3. The dark adaptation timer. Is this a night op? If yes, have I protected at least 30 minutes of adaptation before relying on my night vision? Making those 3 timer checks explicit helps turn abstract rules into concrete gonna-go decisions.
Right. Let's make it even more concrete. Can we run through a few realistic scenarios that drone crews actually face? Force ourselves to make the call based on everything we've discussed?
Perfect. Let's do 4 quick ones. Scenario 1. New prescription. You just got a new antibiotic from the doctor. Nothing obviously sedating, maybe just a standard penicillin type. You took the first pill this morning. You feel okay mostly, but you've got a pretty important client flight scheduled for noon today. What's the call?
The drug itself isn't on the bad list necessarily, but it's the first dose, the unknown factor.
Exactly. Decision and no-go. Why? Professional policies and good airmanship derived from FAA guidance on new medications dictate a minimum observation period, usually 24 to 48 hours after starting any new medication. You simply don't know how your individual body will react. Even a safe drug could cause unexpected mild dizziness, nausea, brain fog, any of which violate Menskarting på NR7 Mot-17's requirement that you know you're fit. You can't know until you've observed yourself on the drug for a day or 2 away from flying duties. Client might grumble, but grounding yourself is the correct, defensible safety decision.
Okay, scenario 1 is no-go due to the observation period. Next up, scenario 2. The morning after, you went out last night, celebrated a big contract win, had a few drinks, stopped maybe 9 hours ago. So you're past the US 8-hour rule, but you feel rough. Dehydrated, sluggish, definitely irritable. Oh, and you popped an ibuprofen with the Benadryl before bed hoping to sleep it off.
Okay, this one's layered. A triple whammy, really. First layer, the alcohol hangover. 9 hours is past the minimum time, yes. But feeling sluggish, irritable, that is residual impairment. Right there, the zero impairment rule from section 91 point something kind of kicks in. Decision should already be leaning towards no-go just based on the alcohol after effects.
But then you added the Benadryl.
And that slams the door shut hard. The Benadryl, diphenhydramine, triggers the 60-hour rule, period. You now have a mandatory 60-hour grounding period, starting from when you took that last dose. The fact that you also feel sluggish just confirms the impairment is real, but the Benadryl dictates the duration of the grounding. Decision, hard and no-go. And you're likely grounded for another, 50-plus hours from this morning?
Okay, clear. No, go there.
Sure.
Scenario 3. Decongestant jitters. You woke up super congested, stuffed up, took one of those behind-the-counter decongestants, maybe with pseudoephedrine or phenylephrine. An hour later, your sinuses feel clearer, you feel alert, but maybe too alert. You notice your hands are a little shaky, heart's beating faster.
Right. This is where medication overlaps with stress emotion, or rather the physiological effects of the medication mimic stress responses. The key here is the side effect. The jitteriness, the tremor, the elevated heart rate, that's a stimulant effect. Decision and no-go. While the drug might make you feel awake, those stimulant side effects directly impact performance. The fine motor tremor screws up your ability to make precise stick inputs. The internal agitation can affect judgment and focus. It clearly violates section 107.17. You have a physical condition interfering with safe operation. You have to wait until those stimulant side effects completely disappear. You might even apply the 5x dosing interval rule to be safe.
Makes sense. Last one, scenario 4. Burning the candle. It's been a rough week administratively. You've only managed about 5 hours of sleep for the last 3 nights straight. You feel drained, but you have an early start 6:1 a.m. launch scheduled, right in that prime circadian low window.
Okay, the villain here is cumulative sleep debt. 3 nights of only 5 hours sleep. That's a significant deficit. Research shows performance degradation comparable to being legally intoxicated. Decision needs intervention, either delay or reassign. Launching at 6 a.m. deep in a circadian trough with that much sleep debt is just asking for an accident. You absolutely must implement fatigue countermeasures. Can the launch be pushed back to, say, 10 a.m. or later, allowing for more rest and avoiding the trough? Can the pilot take a strategic nap before starting? If those aren't possible or sufficient, the mission needs to be reassigned to a crew member who has rested, met the 7-9-hour target. If no rested crew is available, the mission is postponed. Full stop. Safety over schedule.
These scenarios really drive home how interconnected it all is. To make this stick and to prove you're doing it right, documentation seems important.
Documentation is absolutely key, both for building a safety culture and for liability protection. Many pro outfits use an enhanced checklist, sometimes called IMSAFE Full++. They might add an E for eating electrolytes, checking hydration and nutrition, and maybe explicitly a C for alcohol cannabis, just to make it broader. But the core process is simple. Require a clear fitness attestation from every crew member before every flight or operational period. A simple yes-no on the checklist for IMSAFE criteria. You don't need to record specific medical details that gets into privacy issues. Just a generic note like RPI Jones confirmed fit per IMSAFE or VO Smith attested fit on checklist #123 is usually sufficient. It proves you asked the question and documented the self-assessment required by law.
So this whole deep dive, drilling into these numbers and rules, it really boils down to protecting the pilot's judgment. That's the most critical system on board, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Pilot fitness isn't about jumping through regulatory hoops. It's about building robust, science-based defenses against predictable human errors. We've hopefully made it clear why a simple OTC cold med demands a 60-hour timeout, why just meeting the 8-hour alcohol minimum often isn't nearly enough operationally, and why fatigue truly is like invisible bad weather. It grounds you, even if you can't see it. The numbers provide those essential, non-negotiable safety boundaries.
So for everyone listening, as you plan your next flight, really lock in those key numbers. 60 hours minimum for Benadryl and similar meds. Aim for that stricter 12-hour alcohol buffer if possible, but always meet the 8.040 baseline and zero impairment. And respect that coming minute clock for true dark adaptation.
Exactly. And that brings us to maybe a final thought, something provocative for you to consider. We have the IMSAFE checklist, we have these rules and timers, but ultimately the regulation, section 107.22, puts the final responsibility on the individual pilot's honesty and integrity. Now combine that with the fact that we know tired people are bad at judging how tired they are. They genuinely believe they can power through. So the question becomes, how can a team, or even just you as an individual, truly enforce that crucial no impairment rule when the person doing the assessment might be the least capable of making an accurate judgment? It highlights that the responsibility to know the rules, respect the numbers, and make the conservative call, even if it means scrubbing a mission, losing money, or disappointing someone, rests entirely and sometimes uncomfortably on you. That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above, go beyond, get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.